So we're going to go ahead and put things together back in the reverse order. First things first, we're going to use the firing pin and return spring. I'll dump those out into my hand here. You'll notice the firing pin has a little slot cut on one face. That slot in the J-frame will go in the down position when the gun is held in your hand, and we'll show you that as we get to the installation. The firing pin return spring is very tiny and very easy to lose. The way I install it into the frame is I put it onto a 16th inch pin punch, so it's a little harder to lose. We'll set the firing pin aside for now. I'll go into the frame and use the pin punch to basically find the hole with the spring, and I'll use a preferably non-magnetized screwdriver to help kind of guide the spring in and then pull the Allen wrench out. Now I've got the spring located in the frame hole where I need it to be. At this point I'm going to take the firing pin, again with the flat facing downward as I were to use the gun, and since I have big fingers I need to use my little flat nose pliers here. I'll grab the firing pin, if I can grab the firing pin, and work into the hole in the frame gently. You shouldn't have to force anything into the gun. If you do, you're doing something wrong. Take a step back, slow down, and try to figure out what's going on. Okay, once we get the firing pin back into the frame, take the little frame, the firing pin retention pin, put it into the hole, press the firing pin in about halfway of its travel, drop that pin all the way down. I usually use the end of my screwdriver to press the pin into the frame, make sure it's in place. Then I'll push on the pin to make sure it freely moves as it's supposed to. If you push the pin and it doesn't freely move, you may need to clean out the hole in the frame, or you may need to just get any gunk that may be on the firing pin retention pin off of there as well. It should be free moving and clean when it's in the gun. Next component to reinstall is going to be the hammer itself. Oh, I'm sorry, is the rebound slide. When I reinstall a rebound slide, I normally take a little bit of grease. I have some white lithium grease here that's in a syringe. I go into the hole and I leave a track on the bottom and a track on the top. The idea is basically to have grease anywhere that the spring is going to rub on the block. That's going to make sure that as things articulate back and forth, they get a nice layer of lubrication on them. Put the rebound slide spring into the rebound slide. When you look at the back of the trigger itself, you have the little trigger bar that sticks out. It's got a little ball in the end. That little ball catches inside the little detent on the end of the rebound slide itself. So you may need to pull the trigger back just a little bit, drop that trigger bar down, and put the rebound slide onto that hole. It's not going to drop right down with the spring sticking out, so you have to either use the blade of a screwdriver that just barely gets into the spring, or the handy dandy revolver tool. Press the spring inward to compress it against the rebound slide and drop it down over the pin. Once it's down in place, your trigger should articulate smoothly and return on its own as it did from the factory. So now we have our firing pin installed and the rebound slide spring installed. Now we're going to work on the mainspring and mainspring strut itself. This is a part where you may want to have a vise handy or some other means of clamping the rebound slide. In my case, I'm going to use my bench vise. We're going to grab onto the mainspring, the end of the mainspring strut itself, and then I can compress the collar, remove the pin, remove the tension from it, and we'll go from there. So I'll take my little bit of leather here over to the vise. I'm using leather. You can use plastic, you can use a piece of wood, anything that will protect the material from being damaged when you clamp it, because most vise jaws are not perfectly smooth and clean. So with a good firm tension on this so it doesn't go anywhere, I'm going to grab the spring itself and pull down to relieve tension. Actually, I can't do that. I have to grab on the little plastic plug, pull it down to relieve tension, pull the paper clip out. I normally put my thumb over the end so when I relieve the tension off my other hand, I can let the spring go and nothing's going to go flying across the room. Take the mainspring cap off, set that aside, and take the factory mainspring and set that aside as well. I'm going to take the apex mainspring, and I'll use the same white lithium grease I did before, and I'll put some oil or grease inside the spring, again to give it a nice little layer of lubrication. I'll put that spring back over the strut, take the plastic cap, you've got a flat end that the spring drops right into, retension it, seek the hole with the paper clip, make sure you get it through far enough to hold in place, and we're done with that portion. Now with the mainspring, the new Apex mainspring on the strut, we're ready to put it back in the frame. Next thing we're going to do is put the hammer back in. When I put the hammer back in, it's going to be the opposite process as before. You're going to pull the trigger all the way back, hold it to the rear, and in this case you need to basically cock the hammer back to somewhere around that far, and you should be able to rotate it and drop it right back into the frame. It'll seat all the way down, push it, it should be free of tension at this point, press it all the way forward, and then you can relieve tension from the trigger, and that allows the trigger to re-engage on the double action sear surface on the hammer. Once that's reassembled, you can take the strut, the mainspring strut, put it back into the hammer. It'll go it should go all the way in. And at this point, you're going to pull the trigger far enough to compress the mainspring and then pull the paperclip out. And then gently relieve the tension on the mainspring. Sometimes I'll put my other thumb on the hammer to slow it down so it doesn't go slamming forward. At this point, the installation of our products is finished. We're going to go ahead and reassemble the gun. If you have a pistol that has an exposed hammer or a shrouded hammer, you're going to find the little hammer block inside the frame. This actually prevents the gun from firing if you were to drop it on the spur of the hammer itself. The way to reinstall this properly, the top end has a notch that goes where the firing pin is. So you drop that in between the frame and the hammer face, and you drop the little slot onto the little dimple or little pin sticking out of the rebound slide. You can see that little pin right there. It needs to be seated on that pin. Now it has range of motion from here to here, and it needs to be in the fully up position when you go to reinstall it. That makes it easiest for everybody. So press it all the way up till the pin sits against that safety. And at that point, you can put the side plate back on the gun, lock it in at the top, rotate it down. Now this one went on really easily for me. I've had some that take me 5 minutes to get installed. Take your time and install it. It should install smoothly. If you have to use a hammer to tap the side plate on, you're probably doing something wrong. You should be able to just press it down, and again, by pressing up on push the safety all the way to the up position, lock the top of the side plate in, up where the top of the hammer is, drop it in the frame, and it should sit flat with the rest of the frame itself. It shouldn't be sitting out proud at all. I'll go ahead and do this one on this pistol here. Make sure when you remove the side plate screws and when you reinstall them, you use a screwdriver that fits the screw well, not one that's very far undersized and certainly not one that's oversized, because you can put radial scratches on your frame and side plate that are extremely difficult to remove if completely unrepairable. So be cautious about that. It is easy to scratch the frames as you're doing things, especially if you have a nice sharp blue screwdriver. You don't want to crank the screws on really tight. You're going for a tug, which essentially is go down till the screw stops and then give it a little bit of a touch for pressure. That should be it. We'll put the, remember when you put the grips back on, you've got that little lanyard pin you need to keep track of. So the grips can go, one grip panel can go back on. Once that one is on, you can drop the lanyard pin through the frame, make sure it seats flush on the outside. Put the other grip panel on top. Drop your screw in. Tighten your grip screw, and you're all set. Again, make sure the gun's unloaded, and at this point, you can dry fire, and you've got yourself essentially a 9-pound trigger pull rated for duty or carry applications.